The NHS was 75 yesterday, that's July the 5th, 2023. It's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. It was controversial when it started, and it's just the same today. Keep watching and I'll tell you about how it shaped my life as a doctor and as a surgeon.
Gently, man, gently, you're not making bread. Don't forget, to be a successful surgeon, you need the eye of a hawk, the heart of a lion, and the hands of a lady.
When I was growing up, I was fascinated by hospital medicine. It was exciting, dramatic and glamorous. But more than that, it just looked like it was really good fun. I worked as a trainee ODA, that's an operating department assistant, in theatres in a local hospital after I left school and before I went up to university. I just knew then that I wanted to be a surgeon. In the early 80s, I was a medical student. Back then, there were huge advances in medical technology like CT and MRI scans. It was thrilling. But what I remember most about that time was the teaching that we had. Many of the people who taught me would have been medical students when the NHS started. Some of them had been in the war. One of them liberated Belsen. And they were inspirational teachers. Right from the beginning, it was drummed into us that it was our overriding duty to care for the patients to the best of our ability. Not just to treat their diseases, but actually care for them. We learned how to speak to people who are scared and vulnerable, gain their trust, and guide them through the often painful and undignified journey that they're on. As students and junior doctors, we worked hard, but we played harder. The firm was the heart of the team. The firm was 3 or 4 consultants who had a senior registrar, a registrar, and 3 or 4 house officers. We knew everyone's strengths and weaknesses, and we looked after each other. The house officers lived in accommodation provided by the hospital. The doctor's mess was where everything happened. In one hospital where I worked, we had breakfast served to us every morning. The parties were legendary. I'll leave it at that. During the 80s, when I was doing my basic surgical training, the NHS underwent major reforms. A new class of managers was appointed to run hospitals. Many of them had worked in industry, but had no experience of healthcare. Many of my bosses were unhappy at the thought that these new managers could run a hospital in the same way as a large company. Consultants aren't the most tolerant of people, and they made it very clear that they weren't impressed. But the changes kept on coming. Everybody knew that the NHS had to evolve because the demand for healthcare just keeps getting bigger and bigger. In the 90s, successive governments brought in organisational and financial changes, like privatising some services and selling off NHS land and estate. It felt chaotic and very threatening. The buzzword at the time was transformation, but at times it felt more like demolition. In the noughties, the government introduced hospital foundation trusts. The idea behind this was to make hospitals run like autonomous businesses. There were big incentives to get them off the ground, and at first, many of them were very successful. As always though, political influences seemed to hinder rather than help. The old firm structures that I'd grown up with were abolished, and to me that was a great mistake. We all felt disconnected. If you want to know more about how the NHS came to be, I recommend that you read this book, The National Health Service, A Political History by Charles Webster. It was published at the time of the 50th anniversary of the NHS in 1998. I bought a copy back then, and I still have it. If you think things are bad now, it was a lot worse before the NHS started, I can tell you. Has the way that I do my job changed much? In many ways, it hasn't really. The way that I care for my patients is still firmly rooted in the principles that I learned all those years ago as a student. Surgical techniques are much the same. Things change, but people don't. And I find that very reassuring. The NHS has defined this country for 75 years. It truly was a revolution created by inspirational people who wanted us to have universal healthcare from cradle to grave. Will it survive? Well, I've been on the receiving end of NHS healthcare from time to time. Everybody who looked after me was kind, compassionate and professional. They really cared. I think we'll be okay. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.